Welcome to Live with the Guy, broadcasting live from Mexico City every day at 11 a.m. Mexico City time. That's 10 a.m. West Coast time and 1 p.m. if you're on the East Coast of the United States. I have another live news show every night with the beautiful Nat sitting right next to me. That's at 5 p.m. Mexico City time. That would be 4 p.m. on the West Coast or 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Okay, today's stories are going to be Gavin Newsom signs a formal apology for the state's role in slavery one day after vetoing 2 reparation bills. Then we're going to talk about Trump and Zelensky. They ended up meeting after initial thoughts were Trump was going to ghost them. Then at the end of today's show, I'm going to play 2 speeches in full, one of Bukele and one of Javier Milei. They both spoke in front of the UN the other day, and they were phenomenal speeches. So let's get right into it. Gavin Newsom signed a bill with a formal apology for the state's role in slavery. Now, California had not a huge role in slavery compared to other states. They outlawed it in 1850. I think he needed to cover up the fact that he vetoed 2 reparations bills. Now, even though I'm not in favor of formal style reparations, I can understand in a crazy liberal state like California, if you veto a reparations bill and if you want to get reelected, he was going to have to do something. So he signed this formal apology for the state's role in slavery. Now, I will say on reparations, it's not that I completely don't believe in reparations. I just don't think you should be giving one group of people handouts of cash or handouts that only benefit them. I know they were disadvantaged in the past, but you don't fix modern day racism or previous racism with more racism in the modern context. What I think you should do is show benefits to impoverished communities. Now, this will disproportionately help disenfranchised Hispanic and Black communities. So if you invest in the school systems, the educational systems, and other systems and resources in impoverished communities, it can help everybody within that community, but primarily people that will live in that community will be Black and Hispanics. So eventually you'll be able to hopefully even out the disenfranchisement that has happened. Now, Gavin Newsom's a crazy liberal politician. I'll be the first to say this. But in researching this story, I watched a lot of his interviews, and I'll say should have been the candidate they nominated for instead of Kamala Harris to run for the presidency against Trump. He's a hardcore liberal. He knows the talking points. He's the best liar in the Democratic Party. I don't think he would have won against Trump, but I think in 2028 he is going to be their candidate. Okay, let's go right into the Trump and Zelensky. I think I have a clip of this. Nat, do you have that?
Okay. And he wants it to end as quickly as possible. He wants a fair transaction to take place. And I think, right now I'm campaigning. So right now I don't have much to do with it other than we're doing very well in terms of the campaign. And I've been saying that I believe if I win, we're going to have a very fair and I think
it was good to see these two together finally.
Deal. It should stop, and the president wants it to stop, and I'm sure President Putin wants it to stop, and that's a good combination. So we want to have a fair deal for everybody.
What do you envision as fair?
Well, it's too early to say that. I wants it to end, and he wants it to end.
Oh, I guess we're going to stop the clip early. Okay, so that was Trump and Zelensky. Initially, yesterday, the reports were Trump wasn't going to meet with Zelensky, and I had reported on that, and he was only going to meet with Biden and Harris. Today, it was a big win for Zelensky because he was able to get an endorsement from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and it looks like he got it from Donald Trump. He really needed that going back to Ukraine. He wants to be viewed as the hardliner, and he wants to see this war out to the end. I think the end is going to be a negotiation by Donald Trump, but if he is the leader of the country from the beginning of this conflict right to the end, he will have become a very rich man. On the backs of a lot of Ukrainians, I think. But overall, this Zelensky-Trump meeting, I think, was a good thing. Trump's preparing all the parties for a negotiation. That's Vladimir Putin, Zelensky, and himself. and he's positioning them all very well. He had Zelensky on the outside where he really wasn't meeting him, and he was telling him the war was going to end. Now he kind of brought him in, and if you watch the longer clip shows Trump saying he had good relations with Zelensky because Zelensky backed him up on one of the indictments where he said it was a completely perfect phone call. Nothing wrong happened. So I think the fact that Zelensky had backed Trump up back then is really going to play into his favor now. Now, Russia's winning this war without a shadow of a doubt. And I think Putin's going to get all the territory in which he captured once Trump gets into office or just before he gets into office. But I don't think he's going. I think there's room for negotiation, and they're going to have a zone where there is no military, and ultimately Ukraine may have to demilitarize. It's too much of a threat for Vladimir Putin. Russia made it very clear that this was the red line. This is the red line for them. They've been attacked through Ukraine before. For their national security, they can't have a NATO military in there. Just like the United States couldn't have Russia or China, a Chinese military within Mexico or Canada. It's just too much of a security threat. All the parties are now being aligned for a negotiation, and Trump is talking about negotiating this before he even gets into office. What does that mean? That means it looks like Trump's going to win the election in November, but there's quite a few months between November and when he takes office, sometime in January. And I believe he's going to call all parties together and try to get a negotiated truce before he even gets in office, which if he's able to do that, that would be a great start to his administration and showing he's following through on promises. Now let's go into this Javier Milei UN speech. Before I get into these two speeches, I am going to play them in full because I think they're important. I don't want to get hit for a copyright, so you'll hear me talk over their speeches slightly. I also don't want to stop or interrupt it because they're each quite long speeches. One's 14 minutes, one's 11 minutes. I think both leaders are positioning themselves perfectly for our Trump administration. They both have mass appeal to conservatives because they're talking a lot about U.S. constitutional policy and the way that the U.S. was formed, and that was in this context of freedom. You'll hear them both constantly talk about freedom, 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 and this is very important for Argentina and El Salvador. Okay, let's go with the Javier Milei speech first. Okay.
A las autoridades de las Naciones Unidas.
To the authorities of the United Nations, representatives of the various countries, member countries, and all of the citizens of the world that are watching us, good afternoon. For those of you who are not aware, I'm not a politician. I'm an economist. I'm a liberal, libertarian economist who never aimed to be a politician, but who was honored to become the President of the Republic of Argentina following the resounding failure of more than a century of collectivist policies that destroyed our country.
That's absolutely true.
This is my first speech to the United Nations General Assembly, and I'd like to take this opportunity to humbly alert the different nations of the world about the path that we are moving down and have been for decades, and about the danger that this organization failing, as it has been doing in its original mission. I haven't come here to tell the world what it should be doing. I've come here to tell the world, on the one hand, what will happen if the United Nations continues to promote collectivist policies that it's been promoting under the mantle of the 2030 Agenda, and on the other hand, the values of the new Argentina. I want to begin by giving credit where credit's due. The United Nations was born out of the horror of the cruelest war in global history, and the main aim of it was to ensure that it never happened again. To do so, the organization engraved its fundamental principles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. From that was born a basic agreement around one maxim, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Under the watch of this organization, the adoption of these ideas, over the last 70 years, humanity has experienced the longest period of global peace in history, which has
And it's great how
coincided
he
with the
points out the
greatest
positives to
period of
start with
economic
before
growth
he
in
goes into the
history.
negatives
It
and hands
established an
the UN out to
international
dry.
forum in which nations can resolve their conflicts through cooperation rather than resorting instantaneously to weapons, and it achieved something previously unthinkable: to sit the 5 great powers of the world around one same table with the same veto power, despite having completely counterposed interests. All of this didn't mean that the scourge of war disappeared, but it did, at least for now, ensure that no conflict has escalated to global proportions. The result was that we moved from having 2 world wars in less than 40 years, which together claimed more than 120 million lives, to having 70 consecutive years of relative global peace and
We're getting
security
close to
and
war
stability
again, major
under
world
the
wars.
mantle of an order which allowed the entire world to be integrated commercially, to compete and to prosper. Because where trade enters, we don't have bullets, said Bastiat, because trade guarantees peace, peace guarantees, and freedom guarantees trade. Equality before the law guarantees freedom.
Remember, he's an economist.
It managed to ensure what Prophet Isaiah said, that he will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. This is what's happened mainly under the watch of the United Nations in its first few decades. That's why we're talking about an outstanding success in the history of nations that has been achieved by the United Nations, and it cannot be overlooked. Now, at some time, and as often happens with the majority of bureaucratic structures that are created by men, this organization stopped looking after its main aims set out in its founding declaration and started to change. This was an organization that had essentially been thought up as a shield to protect the reign of men, and it became a leviathan with various tentacles purporting to decide not only what each nation state should do, but also how all the citizens in the world should live. That's how we moved from being an organization that pursued peace to an organization that imposes an ideology on its members about an endless list of topics in society. The model of the United Nations that had been successful, the origin of which we can see in the ideas of President Wilson, who talked about the need for peace without victory, and that was founded out of cooperation from nation states, has been abandoned. It's been replaced by a model of supranational government, of international bureaucrats that attempt to impose on citizens of the world a specific way of living. What we're discussing in New York this week at the Summit of the Future is nothing more than going further down this tragic path, the tragic path that this institution has adopted. Going further down this path, which in the very words of the Secretary General, calls on us to define a new social contract, redoubling our commitments in the 2030 Agenda. On this, I'd like to be clear about Argentina's position. The 2030 Agenda, although it's well-intentioned in its goals, is nothing but a supranational government program that is socialist in shape. It purports to resolve the problems of modernity with solutions that afflict the sovereignty of nation states and violate the right to life, right to freedom, and property of persons. It's an agenda that purports to resolve poverty, inequality, discrimination with legislation that simply furthers these issues. Because the history of the world has shown that the only way of guaranteeing prosperity is by limiting the power of the monarch, by guaranteeing equality before the law, defending the right to life, to freedom, and to the ownership and property of individuals. The adoption of this agenda is fully in line with these privileged interests and looks beyond the principles that were set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It has therefore twisted the role of this organization and set it on the wrong course. We've seen how an organization that was born to defend the rights of man has become one of the main proponents of systematic violations of freedom, such as, for instance, the lockdowns imposed in 2020, which should be seen as a crime against humanity. In this same house, that purports to defend human rights, we have also included bloody dictatorships in the Human Rights Council, including Cuba and Venezuela, without reproach. In this same house, which purports to defend the rights of women, we've allowed on CEDAW, the CEDAW committee,
He's just pointing out
countries that
everything.
punish their women just for showing their skin. In this same house that had voted against the state of Israel, which is the only country in the Middle East to defend a liberal democracy, we have simultaneously shown a total inability to respond to the scourge of terrorism. On the economic level, we have promoted collectivist policies that undermine economic growth, violate property rights, and disrupt a natural economic process, preventing the most left behind countries to freely enjoy their own resources. They have imposed regulations and prohibitions specifically because of countries that wish to develop themselves. We have further established a toxic relationship between global governance and international credit bodies, demanding that those countries that are most left behind commit resources that they don't have to programs that they don't need, making them perpetual debtors. We have also seen ridiculous policies with Malthusian stances, such as policies, zero emissions policies that harm all poor countries, policies related to sexual and reproductive rights, when birth rates in Western countries are plummeting, announcing a somber future for all of us. The organization has met its mission of upholding territorial sovereignty of its members. As we know, the Argentines have a first-hand experience of this with the Malvinas Islands. We have also seen that the veto of the permanent members of the Security Council has begun to be used in the defense of the specific interests of a certain few. That's where we are today, with a powerless organization, powerless to provide solutions to the true global conflicts. For instance, the aberrant Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has costed the lives of more than 300,000 people and left behind more than 1 million wounded. This is an organization that, rather than tackling these conflicts, invests time and effort in imposing on poor countries how they should and how much they should produce, who they should do relations with, what they should eat, what they should believe in, the Pact for the Future purports to dictate. This long list of errors and contradictions
almost sounds like a dictatorship.
Has led to a loss of credibility for the United Nations before the citizens of the free world. I'd like to issue a warning here. We are coming to the end of a cycle. Collectivism and the moral posturing and the woke agenda is coming up against reality. There are no further credible solutions to the real problems of the world. If the 2030 agenda fails, as recognized by its own promoters, the response should be to wonder whether or not this was an ill-conceived program from the outset. We should accept this reality and change what we're doing. The same thing always happens with ideas that come from the left. They're designing a model in line with what human beings should do, and when individuals freely decide to act otherwise, they have no better solution than to restrict, repress, or cut off their freedom. In Argentina, we've seen with our own eyes what they have done at the end of this path of envy and sad passion, poverty, anarchy, and a total lack of liberty. We still have time to choose another direction. I want to be clear so that there's no poor misunderstanding here. Argentina is going through a profound process of change currently, has decided to embrace the ideas of freedom. These are ideas that say that all citizens are born free and equal before the law, that we have inalienable rights granted by our Creator. To life, to freedom, and to property. These principles that are setting the framework of the process of change that we're undertaking in Argentina are also the principles that will guide our international conduct from now on.
Sounds like
we believe in the defense of life for all. We believe in the defense of property for all. We believe in freedom of expression for all. We believe in freedom of worship for all. We believe in freedom of trade for all, and we believe in limited government, all. And in these times, what happens in one country has a swift impact on others, and we believe that peoples should be able to live free of tyranny and oppression, be it political oppression, economic slavery, or religious fanaticism. This fundamental idea shouldn't be mere words. It should be supported by our acts diplomatically, economically, and materially through the joint force of all of the countries that stand up for freedom. This doctrine of the new Argentina is no more and no less than the true essence of the United Nations, that is, the cooperation of nations united in the defense of freedom. If the United Nations wants to
Almost sounds like traditional
resume the
liberal
principles that led to
not
its
these
birth
progressive
and adopt the role for
craziness.
which it was designed, it can count on the full support of Argentina in its struggle for freedom. You should be aware, though, that Argentina will not support any policy that implies restricting individual or trade freedoms, nor the violation of the natural rights of individuals, regardless of who promotes these or how big the consensus is in this institution. For this reason, I'd like to officially express our dissent on the Pact for the Future that was signed on Sunday, and I invite all nations of the free world to support us, not only in relation to this pact, but also in the establishment of a new agenda for this noble institution, that is, the agenda for freedom. From this day on, you should know that Argentina, the Republic of Argentina, will abandon its policy of historic neutrality and will be on the vanguard in the struggle for the defense of freedom. Because, as Thomas Paine said, those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. Long live freedom, God damn it. Thank you very much.
That was
On
the
behalf of
perfect
the
ending to that speech. I got to take my hat off to Javier Milei, whether it works out for him or whether it doesn't. I think we're in the transition right now, and we're in that wait and see period to see if his policies are going to work out. He has some really radical libertarian economic policies while having a lot of traditional liberal values, along with a lot of conservative values as well. He's backed by a lot of the conservative parties within Argentina. His party is actually a very, very small party. In order to get a lot of his ideas through, he had to be backed by other parties, and the parties that are backing him are conservative. And that's why Javier Milei is very often talked about as far right or conservative, even though he's a libertarian economist. He is aligned with a lot of conservatives within the country. Now, for him to point all this out in front of the UN to their face was absolutely amazing. Very few world leaders are able to do this. I really hope it works out for him. He's trying to stabilize the Argentinian economy by adopting the US dollar. And if he's able to stabilize the economy with the US dollar, he eventually wants to go to Bitcoin and get out of the US dollar so they have some level of sovereignty. And that's why I think if it works, I think it's going to be a roadmap for a lot of other countries. It's nice to hear him talking about freedom and a lot of other traditional liberal and conservative values. I think he's a very unique leader in that sense. He's trying things that haven't been tried before. Argentina is in all kinds of trouble before he came in. They were going to be in trouble whether he got in there or whether he didn't. If any other politician got in there, they were going to do a lot of the same policies that other failed states had done previous to them. At least with Javier Milei, whether he succeeds or fails, he's trying something new. So you're going to be able to see what works and what doesn't, rather than the same old thing over and over and over again. Also, I think he's really leading the charge and trying to reform the UN. The UN is going hardcore into crazy liberal policies. I watched hours and hours and hours of this summit they had over the weekend. It was one of their big summits, and what they were proposing was absolutely crazy. More crazy left liberal agendas, going even further and hardcore into climate change. I don't care if you think it's real or it's fake. The point is that they're trying to create mass controls with this idea of climate change over people of every nation. They can see that there's a divergence happening right now between globalist nations and nationalist nations with this Trump effect coming in. Places like Argentina, places like El Salvador, places like the United States and Canada are really gearing towards nationalism. If you listen to what happened in the UN this weekend, they're really trying to make mass hirings amongst young radicalists to create a disturbance within these nationalist countries and these nationalist governments to try to implement globalist controls and keep them aligned with the UN. If these countries move away from the UN, the idea of globalism is really going to die where it is now. So the UN, I think, needs to reform, and it needs to reform in the sense it needs to ask for sovereignty and liberty for each individual country. You need to build strong individual countries, so when you come together as a collective or a small collective, that you're very strong. What they're trying to do right now is just bring everybody together, and we're strong because we're one big gang and everybody has to do what we say because we have all the economic leverage. Well, they're taking away the sovereignty and the freedom of the people. They're trying to empower the elites and disenfranchise the people of these countries. That's why people are going towards nationalism right now. I think Bukele is in a very similar situation. You'll hear him talk a lot about freedom as well. Bukele had a completely different strategy than Argentina did. Argentina didn't have the same crime problem that Bukele had in El Salvador. So what Milei did was go right after the economics. He's trying some radical economic policies, really downsized government, did a lot of things that Trump is saying that he wants to do. Now, Bukele had an extra layer of problems, and that was crime. So he had to become very authoritarian, I'd say, and really crack down on crime. But if he didn't do that, the country really had no chance to clean up economically. Bukele's been successful at the first thing of cutting down crime. If you don't know, El Salvador was the murder capital of the Western Hemisphere. Now it's one of the safest countries in the Western Hemisphere. It's even more safe than the United States or Canada. Now, the fact that he has cleaned it up, he says his next agenda is to really fix the economy. He has a little bit different ideas than Milei does, but we'll see if they work. I really, really hope it does work because it's giving really conservative or right-wing populism a chance to thrive in South America. Traditionally, left-wing populism and left-wing ideas have dominated this space. Let's get into Bukele real quick. I know the live stream is going a little long, but I think these speeches they gave at the UN are extremely important. Again, I'm going to talk over a little bit so I don't get copyrighted. I don't want to pause it. Okay, let's go with it.
Señor Presidente.
President of the General Assembly. Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, distinguished members of the delegations with us here today, ladies and gentlemen. When I came to this General Assembly for the first time in 2019, I know that many of you didn't know El Salvador or hadn't even heard of El Salvador.
Very small country.
And if you had heard of it, you only had heard bad references, either the most violent country in the world or the country of gangs. Others didn't even know where to put us on the map. But thanks to God, this has significantly changed, and in a very short time. 5 years since my first speech, I come here as the president of a country that now has a voice in the world. In my previous statements to this General Assembly, I talked about the quest for our true independence. For decades, we were in chains due to an imported civil war and then a false peace that left behind more dead than war itself. I also talked about the importance of remembering that the main responsibility of a government is towards its own people, and the crucial importance of taking our own fate into our own hands.
Very true.
We shouldn't believe that other countries would save us or that other nations would give us our own freedom. We had to understand this. to then have the courage to break these chains ourselves and to reclaim our own legitimate right to be free. Over the last 5 years, El Salvador has been born again. You can see this in the countries and in the people. We have a flourishing tourist industry. We are a country of sports, surf, and entertainment. Thousands of Salvadorians fled war and poverty. They're now coming. We've now made this a country to return to. And our nation was once the global capital of homicides. We've now made this the safest country in our region. This was a great challenge that our nation overcame. But we still have a lot to do and many things to achieve. But we are now on the cusp of true independence and the path towards true freedom. The transformation of El Salvador is without comparison, and our success is undeniable. Anyone can visit El Salvador and see this for yourself.
They're setting a roadmap for other small countries.
Salvadorians, regardless of for whom they voted, where they were born, will at least say whether or not they are within or outside our borders, have come to support all of our decisions, each of the decisions that allow El Salvador to be the country in which people can live calmly and in peace, in which spiritual aspirations beyond material aspirations transcend everything. Today, the world is looking at the example of El Salvador, and they wonder, how can a country lift itself up so quickly? But perhaps this isn't the right question to ask. Perhaps they should be asking a different question. How is the rest of the world falling down so quickly?
Wow.
They say that El Salvador is swimming against the tide because El Salvador has become safer, and at the same time the world has become less safe. Well, the Salvadorian people has become more optimistic. The majority of the people in the modern world have become increasingly pessimistic. And they're right. The world has become divided, depressed, concerned, and hopeless. And it's done so in an unprecedented pace. The free world is no longer free. This is not an exaggeration. Tragically, we have undeniable proof of this every day. New threats of war continue. When the free world became free, it was due to freedom of expression, freedom before the law. But once a nation abandons the principles that make it free, it's only a question of time before it completely loses its freedom. The consequences of this we can see before our eyes. We can see them in in some of the most advanced countries in the world. There are simple things, for instance, that cannot be obtained. In other cities, streets no longer belong to the people. They've fallen into the wrong hands, the hands of drug traffickers and gangs. They can't call themselves a free country when people can't freely walk in the street without fear of being attacked. We're also seeing the erosion of freedom of expression. Just 1 decade ago, it was.
She's really falling apart.
The biggest platform of social media in the world has had to use its citizens of Western countries have been arrested for their postings on social media. Governments have had to impose restrictions. This isn't a conspiracy theory. These are fully documented, proven facts. You can't win the favor of the people without respecting people. This only started it didn't start just a while ago. We've only now just noticed it now because it's accelerating, and this means that we are moving towards a scary inflection point. We are standing before a new dark period for humanity. As a Salvadorian, I recognize these symptoms because we have experienced all of them. We saw the collapse of our nation step by step, and we are seeing these same steps, but this time on a global scale. We cannot, nor do we want to tell other countries what they should do. Every country needs to take its own decisions and do what's best for its people. We can only offer a word of warning to a friend who's gone through a dark period and who has gone through a battle in their own lives.
Very wise words.
We can't change the direction of the world. El Salvador is too small a country for that. We are indeed the smallest country in the whole of the American continent. This is much bigger than us, and in fact it's much bigger than any nation. We can't prevent the obscure times that are ahead, but what we can do is become a small refuge in light of the approaching storm and try to have hope. In El Salvador, we will not renounce our position. We don't confiscate the goods of people, property of people who don't agree with us. We don't arrest people for their own ideas. In El Salvador, we have freedom of expression, and that will always be protected. In El Salvador, we prioritize public safety over the comfort of criminals. Some people say that we are the country that has imprisoned thousands, but actually we've freed millions. Now the good people are living free, without fear, without freedoms and with freedoms and human rights fully respected. We want our people to prosper. That's why we foster innovation and new ideas. We understand that we need to have a safe space for ideas to flourish so that we can have research and experiments. We shouldn't be focused through antiquated regulations or something that is opposed to change. In El Salvador, you will find a space to explore your ambitions, be that in technology, energy, medicine, arts, culture, music, or architecture. Just a few years ago, El Salvador was one of the darkest places on the entire planet. But in a short time, our country was born again because we remembered that freedom is something that you take. It isn't given to us. It isn't gifted to us. And that like anything that is worth taking in life, it should be looked after and maintained. Today, El Salvador is a safe country for progress and innovation, but also for families and also as we seek to pursue our own aims. In El Salvador, we welcome you all, mainly for our people, but also for anybody who wishes to contribute to our vision. It won't be easy to do this. The next step, in fact, is perhaps harder than the previous steps that we've had to take. We have freed our country, but we need to maintain this freedom and do so in a world that is increasingly less free. El Salvador has left its past behind that we never wish to return to again. Perhaps it will be too late to avoid the obscure times ahead for our world, but it's not too late to build a bridge and to escape the storm. May God bless humanity. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of El
for Bukele there. It's the opposite of what Justin Trudeau got when he went to the UN. When Justin Trudeau went to the UN, the room was empty. There was a couple people there and nobody clapped for him. Like the ideas that Bukele has are absolutely on the cutting edge of what small countries need to do to turn it around. He had an absolute horrendous time with crime within that country with MS-13. And the fact that he was able to clean it up, yes, he had to be extremely hard on crime to clean it up. But he had to get to that point in order for them to reform the economic future of that country. It's going to be very interesting to watch El Salvador as well as Argentina to see their financial future, because that's really what's going to dictate if these two countries are successes. By the way, also, if Salvador was in Central America, I misspoke and said it was in South America by accident. It's right next to Honduras, slightly south of Mexico. Now, he is trying to get a lot of innovators and capitalists into El Salvador. You'll see a lot of North Americans, Americans and Canadians currently moving to El Salvador. A lot of people fled El Salvador because the crime was so high, and now they're starting to return because it's now a safe country again, and the people want to return home. If you haven't seen the interview with Bukele and Tucker Carlson, I highly recommend it. It's one of the best interviews I've ever seen. So he actually talks about a retaining wall within the country. There was a bunch of houses on the bottom of a big mountain, and the mountain was starting to collapse. So the previous government decided to start building this this retaining wall that was costing hundreds of millions of dollars. And Bukele said, "Well, why are you building this retaining wall?" They asked for more money. He said, "No more money. What we're gonna do is we're gonna move those houses. We're gonna build new houses for these people that are better than their old houses and in a better location, and just give them those new houses rather than building the retaining wall. Even if they built the retaining wall and it was successful, eventually it's going to need upkeep and it's going to slowly erode, collapse, and decay. Why not move the people's homes to somewhere more safe, in a better location and better built?" I'm sure the people aren't going to be complaining that they're being given much nicer houses, newer houses, because they were in danger. So I'm going to be very interested to see if Bukele keeps getting reelected. I think the people like his policies in El Salvador. Also with Javier Milei, he's a little bit of a different situation because his party's much smaller. He's got very, very small party, and he has to rely on the conservatives a lot. But so far, so good for both of these people. It's more of a wait and see situation. The wait and see is if economically these countries turn out well, they're going to be touted as huge successes. Also, the first principles of Javier Milei, I think, is the best position to put a country in if you're in Central South America. And that position is a libertarian position. He's currently trying to stabilize the country with the US dollar, but he wants to get off the US dollar and go into Bitcoin, which will give them autonomy. What does that mean? That means he'll be able to trade with China and Russia and America and Europe. He'll be able to play that middle ground. He doesn't have to just trade with Western countries. He can also trade with the global majority. This is the best possible position for South American countries to be put in. And hopefully more South American leaders try to do the same. It's going to be interesting when Trump gets in, because I don't think he likes these countries playing both sides of the coin. But both Javier Milei and Bukele are on the good side of Trump. Okay, until next time, I'm Guy. Oh yeah, again, I got a show at 5 p.m. Mexico City time. That's 4 p.m. on the West Coast and 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Nat's going to be here with me tonight, and we're going to cover some more pop culture and news stories. Adios.